A long time ago, I started out in life as an honest physicist, and I never thought I'd do anything but work in a particle physics lab and uh, do that kind of research. Then I made a mistake, if you will, of going to a weekend seminar on nuclear weapon arms control. And I got fascinated by it because it mixed politics and international relations with really good, hard science. Uh, and of course, for anybody who is my age, which is
All right.
presumably everybody else's age here, uh, if you're interested in science, the one great discovery was the Manhattan Project. And of course, they've never told the public exactly what happened. So if you're a physics student, you try to figure it out on your own, and maybe you get somewhere and maybe you don't. And at some point, you maybe take the king's shilling and you volunteer and go behind the fence for a while. And that's certainly what I did. I didn't expect it was going to take the rest of my career when 40 years ago I got involved, but it has. And I could tell war stories forever talking about negotiating with the Soviet Union on the START Treaty and things like that. But I'm going to pick up with a story of the dumbest secret agent on the face of the earth. It begins when we had a whole bunch of frequent flyer miles. And when our not quite next door neighbor, but down the block neighbor, who worked for the State Department, got promoted to being consul general in Hong Kong. Consul general in Hong Kong is just like being an ambassador anywhere else, given the way it was before the takeover. And so they disappeared, and after a few months sent us a letter and said, why don't you come visit us for a week or two? Well, we had the frequent flyer miles to do it. So why not go to Hong Kong? And if you're going to go to Hong Kong, you'd be foolish not to go to China, right? So we land in Hong Kong after flying God knows how many hours and a couple of changes of aircraft. And yeah, it was business class, but this was 1995 and business class wasn't what it is today. You couldn't stretch out and so on. We land in HK and our neighbor picks us up and we get in the car and we're heading off towards their residence on the Peak. The US government bought many, many, many years ago that piece of land, which is at the highest point of Hong Kong. So you've got a view down to the harbor and then a view back to the other side, and a view off towards the New Territories and a view out to the ocean. It is magnificent. We're driving up the Peak and she says to me, Pete, I hope you brought your tuxedo. And I said, what? That I'm planning to go to backwoods China. What would I want a tux for? She says, because tomorrow night we're going to this fancy thing that the Austrian consul general and the Austrian Chamber of Commerce are doing, and they brought in the Vienna Philharmonic and this and that and a fancy dinner. So I had to go rent a tux. A, I was a good bit heavier then than I am now, and B, I'm about 5'10". Imagine how likely it was that they'd have anything that fitted. They didn't. But I got crammed into one, and we had a wonderful time. And then we went off a few days later after exploring HK. We flew off to Xi'an, and we landed. Before the plane got down to the ground, you inhaled and you were choking to death on the fumes. China then was awful. I think it still is.
It is.
We saw the Terracotta Army, and we saw a museum, and then we took off by plane to a provincial city called Lanzhou, which is in Gansu province, which is heading out to northwest China. Northwest China was not the most highly developed part of the country. We spent the day in Lanzhou and walked along the Yellow River Valley and had a lot of fun, and got on soft class train that was supposed to take 12, but did take 17 hours to get to a town called Jiayuan in far western China. Why Jiayuan? Because we fell in love with a photograph in a tour book showing the last fort on the Great Wall. And it is spectacular, and it is beautiful out there, and there's so little industry to the west that the skies are almost clear. So it was one of the most romantic things we had ever seen. So we said, okay, we'll go. And we planned a trip to get out there. It wasn't easy to get there. And then we had been told that if you're going to go that far out in Western China, you got to go another 400 miles or 200 miles, sorry, and get to the Mogao Caves, where, and Barbie, have you been there, Barb? Oh,
Almost.
You gotta go. It is where Chinese and Indian civilizations met and melded, and it's spectacular. And when we were there, you actually could get into the caves. Now you can get into the reproductions. Oh, well. We get off the train in Jiayuan, and we have guide service arranged everywhere, because in those days you could not travel independently in China, period. No problem for them to figure out who their customers were, because we were the only white people getting off the train. Practically the only people getting off the train. And this guy comes up to me, and he's really quite tall for a Chinese anyway, pretty tall for a Westerner. And he is wearing a jacket that says in very large letters, Chicago Bulls. And we meet and we shake hands, and he says, Mr. Zimmerman, yes. He said, I have studied in your country. I have been to Stanford University. Oh? Ava starts talking and starts to say, our daughter's there. And I started to say for an instant, well, I was there. And then I realized that he wasn't.
Oh.
But it made a nice opening gambit. And so we let that play as long as we could. Finally, after asking a few questions, he says, well, no, I wasn't really at Stanford. I was at another school down the road. You may have heard of it. It's called Berkeley. Oh, okay. About this time, we're realizing that his English wouldn't have supported going to Podunk Community College. But play along. So I said, oh, you were in Berkeley. You must know all about Telephone Avenue. Telephone Avenue?
That's
Oh, it's Telegraph Avenue if you've ever been there. And it was in the time he was claiming to have been there, it was nothing but head shops and hippies. So we said, oh, yes, it's this beautiful tree shaded,
yeah, right.
lovely residential neighborhood. At which point we were practically choking on our laughter. Then the pièce de résistance, he looks at me, he says, Dr. Zimmerman, are you in arms control by any chance? Why, yes. How did you just have that look about you.
Yeah, right.
Now, the fact that to get to Jaguan, I'd had to fill out all kinds of paperwork, including where I worked. And that when I got back to Beijing, I was going to be the guest of the Chinese Academy of Sciences to talk to some of their nuclear weapons scientists. Maybe he might have read about it. So we decided that this guy had to be the dumbest secret agent on the face of the earth. He fell for every trick and trap that you will have learned if you read James Bond. And I'm sure everybody's read James Bond or seen the movies or read a little John le Carre. Believe me, he was a caricature of all of that.
That's funny.
He wasn't real happy to take us where we wanted to go, but he did because we were paying for it. We wanted to see where the Great Wall actually petered out in the desert. And at that point, you couldn't quite get there. And at this point today, I don't think you can either because they've reconstructed so much. Back then, it was just mud walls that were gradually disappearing into the desert sands. So we had some fun out there and got on an airplane and flew back to Beijing. I should say that before we, no, I better not. We get back to Beijing and the Academy of Sciences has arranged an absolutely spectacular tour for me and Ava. We go to the lab in central Beijing that is the equivalent of the Livermore National Lab here, where we design H-bombs. And they showed us all kinds of good things. And then we got to talking. At this point in 95, the argument between the US and the Chinese on arms control was, should we have a comprehensive end to all nuclear testing, all nuclear explosions?
Mhm.
The American position was absolutely none, because it's so much better for the US. We've shot over 1,000 tests. What do we need another one for? Everybody else has shot 100. They can do with more testing. They'll learn something, we won't. So there was one thing that the Chinese desperately thought they wanted to do. They wanted to see if you could do anything in the way of peaceful uses of atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs.
For
Somebody's
instance.
going like this. I can't read the name. It
That's
says
Mr.
iPad.
Terry. What?
Well, everybody has, who's ever built the bombs has looked for something peaceful. What could you do? Well, we have used them to stimulate oil flow in oil shale. We call it fracking now, and we don't do it with an A-bomb, but the first tests were done with A-bombs. The Soviets carved out a great big harbor on the Arctic Ocean. We tried to do much the same at Amchitka in Alaska. We tried to build caves in salt mines in Louisiana and Mississippi. Bet you didn't know we were shooting nuclear bombs in Mississippi.
Sorry about the sirens behind my house.
Yeah.
If I were,
I can't hear them.
Mm-mm.
am I not allowed? Is the audio not working?
Audio's working. Betty was apologizing for
Sirens just went
sirens.
by my window. Sorry.
We're all used to them in Chicago.
So, yeah, we actually did make a lot of tests for mining purposes in this country. The Chinese desperately wanted to be able to do peaceful nuclear explosions. And we desperately did not want any outs at all. We said no testing at all, because any tests that we would be allowed to do, the Indians would be allowed to do, or the North Koreans, and they'd learn a lot more than anybody else. I said to the Chinese, we've had 40, 50 tests and they never found anything that we could do. So the Russians made at least that many and couldn't find anything. So they said, well, but 20 years from now, 10 years from now, they might find something. We want to have the right to do it. On our way back to our hotel, we're being driven there by a sweet old grandmother type. She was a little small, thin, attractive, gray-haired, slightly stooped woman, who actually was a major general in the People's Liberation Army, but never mind. There are things you get told before you make a trip like this that you might not want to let on to the people you're visiting that you know. But she was a two-star, and she was one of the real powers in their test ban negotiations. So I said, Madam Zhao, I just had an idea. The treaty allows amendments, except it was zero testing of any kind. But just before we sign, lay down a marker and say at the end of 5 years or 10 years after the treaty enters into force, if we've come up with a useful idea for a peaceful nuclear explosion, we reserve the right to propose an amendment to allow it. She looked at me and she said, that's brilliant. Well, when I got home, I reported it. Obviously, you got to report something like that. And as 1996 rolls in and we're starting to get to the very end game of this treaty negotiation, and everything is stalled, and the Chinese won't budge. They want peaceful explosions. Finally, at the very last minute, they said, why don't we lay down a marker, and in 10 years, if we can find something to do, we'll propose an amendment. And that's how it went down.
Oh,
I got an invitation to go up to New York to the UN when President Clinton signed the treaty. That was my reward out of it, which I thought was pretty nice, actually. But maybe you want me to talk a little bit about something that happened several years later, which was when I went to work for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as the chief scientist. Our boss then was a guy by the name of Joe Biden. He was chairman of the committee and I was his chief scientist. And I started work the last week of August 2001. 2 weeks later, hell broke loose.
oh, yeah, of course.
Getting into work that morning was absolutely impossible. Roads were blocked. A friend of mine had gotten in early and was working at the FAA, and she was in a conference on the 7th floor of the building looking out over at the Pentagon. And she saw the plane hit, which was not, I think, the nicest way to spend her morning. We get to the, I get to the Capitol, I park my car, I go into the Senate office building, and I could give them a report because they were hearing on the television that the State Department had been hit with an airplane. And not 5 minutes earlier, I had driven right by the State Department and there was no damage there at all, no plane. That was just a rumor that didn't have any reason for being. But as you know, rumors get started very easily and it's easy to start and hard to stop. So Joe is on the train coming down to Washington from Wilmington. As you know, he used to go home every evening, come in every morning. He'd do his reading on the train. So it was work time actually, and the phone wasn't ringing and the lobbyists weren't there, and it's good working time. We're on the phone to his cell phone saying, well, you know, we're watching this building come down, which was, as you all remember, no fun. He keeps saying, you continue working. Get this ready for me and that ready for me and something else. About that time, a very junior young Capitol Hill policeman comes into the office and said, would you please leave? We're clearing the building. Would you please? No, we cannot leave. We are on the telephone with Senator Biden. We can't, we are trying to get work done for him. Okay, sirs, ladies. He disappears. 5 minutes later, the deputy chief of the Capitol Cops comes in, and he's a man that we all recognized and respected and had been around for years and years and years. And he walks in and he said, I must insist that you leave now. There is still one plane in the air and it's headed this way. We don't know where it's going, but it's headed this way. Apologies to the senator, and we grabbed our notebooks and our briefcases and charged out to the parking lot. Well, of course, the Senate office buildings were probably not going to be hit by the airplane. The airplane would go into the Capitol Dome or something. But still in all, I wouldn't have wanted to be that close. We're talking with the senator, and finally he says, look, you can't get anything done today. Go home, be safe, see you in the morning. He's that kind of a guy. He's looking out for his people before he looks out for anything else. He got into town, he was picked up, he did a little bit of work, and I didn't see him the rest of the day. The next morning, I come in. I was stopped as I was going into the building by a French TV crew, and they said, aren't you afraid to be going in here? And I said, what are you going to say? You don't want to tell them you're scared stiff. And you've got to go. There are people out there who are in worse danger than we ever would have been. So work stabilizes. We go on the way we had been. My tasking was to write a declaration of war. Never thought I'd sit down at a word processor and write about a day that will live in infamy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what I had to do the rest of that day. Fortunately, we tore it up. We didn't use it, which I was glad. It wasn't a very well-written piece anyway. Then you may have forgotten, but those of us who lived through it never will. A week later, a letter containing anthrax spores showed up in the building.
Yeah.
And it was not well handled. The first thing they did is they set up testing for people who might have been exposed in the building, in the air shaft, where they had found the anthrax spores. Thank you.
God. Naivete.
Now, I knew that I had not been in that building the day of the release of the spores. I had been, the last time I'd been in that building had been several days before. So I was not actually worried in the slightest. But days go by and they move the testing. They move the testing to an absolutely wonderful place, a gymnasium off the Capitol site. Except that it's a school gymnasium.
God.
That's being used as a daycare center for the kids of the congressional staffs. The physician of the Capitol did not get his job because he was a brilliant physician. He did not have a degree in public health. He probably had a degree in political something. So I didn't feel like going over and getting tested because I knew pretty well that I didn't have any exposure. But it's the very last day of getting tests. And Biden comes up to me and said, how did your test come out? And I said, I didn't get one. He said, why not? I said, because I'm pretty sure I wasn't anywhere near exposure. Puts a hand on my shoulder. He is a bit touchy, of a kind of touchy-feely kind of guy. Puts a hand on my shoulder. He says, Pete, go over there and get tested. Do it for your wife. She's got to know. She's got to be sure you weren't exposed. So, okay, it was a block or two walk. It wasn't much. I went over there. I stood in line with all the other potentially exposed people carrying anthrax spores on their clothing and all the rest, and waited for him to swab my nose. It was exactly the same kind of a nasal swab that they're doing for COVID. And as soon as I finished, they said, well, it'll be several days before we know. But the way anthrax works, here's a bottle of ciprofloxacin. Go take the Cipro 3 times a day until we tell you you haven't been exposed. Cipro's not a lot of fun to take.
No, it's not.
So I went home and I followed instructions and I took it. And I had the most horrible nightmare. And I took it the next day and I had the most horrible, worst nightmare. I said, I'm not taking this again. If they tell me I've been colonized, that I've been exposed, I'll take it. Next day, the letter comes and says, you have not been exposed. So the Cipro went on the shelf just in case before it expired, we needed it for something, who knows what. Working for Biden was one of the most wonderful experiences I have ever had. The guy is a real taskmaster. He really drives his people pretty hard. And he doesn't always give you credit for what you've done. Sometimes he takes a little of it for himself. But he gave me the opportunity to say truthfully, I'm the guy who brought 2 atomic bombs into the Capitol building. We were having hearings on mass destruction terrorism and on nuclear terrorism in particular. So I had this idea that I would ask friends at Los Alamos to make models, full-scale models of what a terrorist nuclear weapon might look like. So they did. And suddenly I realized the hearing is day after tomorrow, and they're going to be bringing these 2 caskets up into the secure area of the Capitol. No, it wasn't an open hearing. It was in our classified spaces. How am I going to get them in? They inspect everything that goes into that room. I had this picture in my mind. The Capitol policeman said, what do you have in that box, kid?
Nothing.
An atomic bomb. What? Yeah. Can I see? No. Trust me, it's inert. So I realized that what I really needed to do was call the chief of the Capitol Police and say, what do I do now? How do you want to handle this? He said, have them delivered to the loading dock at the Capitol.
Jeez.
We have officers who are cleared for anything, including nuclear weapons, and who know what they're looking at. So they looked in the boxes and they cleared them. Yes, they were nukes, but no, they weren't live. They didn't have any uranium or plutonium. They had what's called simulant, and they didn't have any explosives in them. They just had plastic foam that was labeled high explosive. And so we took it upstairs. And then they take it into the secure area and the senators start coming in. And the stupid idiots from the Department of Energy start asking US senators for their badges to see if they have the right clearance. what you may not know is that, and I sure didn't, so I don't think most people know, is that a senator has, by virtue of being elected, clearance to see anything that's necessary for his business or hers. And so that meant that they could see what was there and there was no problem. Their staffs, however, couldn't come with them because the staffs didn't have clearances in general. There were just a few of us on the committee who did. So there was this big fight about the staffs and the senators, and it's a good thing I had called in advance, I think. Finally, when they open up the caskets and people get to go looking in at them, Hillary Clinton is there, and she looks at the model from Los Alamos, which was basically just like the one dropped on Hiroshima, and she says, "Is that all there is to an atomic weapon?" And I said, "Yes. My husband never told me that." Several of my colleagues who heard that whispered, "Your husband never told you a lot of things, lady." So we did get some legislation to try and slow nuclear terrorism, and we did alert people, and it all came out very well in the end. I could go on for a long time, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stop right here. I've probably taken more time than Barbie actually wanted me to. So
Not at all. I think we've all got tons of questions.
why don't I just open it up and let anybody who's got questions ask? And if I can't answer the question
Right.
in public, I won't.
Right.
Okay.
Penelope?
Know what I'm going to ask. Can we shut off the recording and you tell us the things that you can't tell us on recording?
No.
Okay.
If I can't record it, if you can't record it, I can't say it anyway.
Fair
Look,
enough.
I've had the
But I had
clearance
to ask.
to know
Of course you did.
how nuclear weapons work and how our spy satellites work and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
At one point, I was up to here with current secrets. Fortunately, they're all 10 years old now, but that doesn't mean that they're unclassified.
Thank
See,
you.
I have no desire to go to jail just over a cocktail party.
No, not at all. Couple of questions. I remember during, oh God, Kuwait, when we were bombing the oil fields. Is that the correct war? And there was overhead, somebody was checking what they were seeing on film. What were they looking for? Did I
Well,
catch that correctly?
we were not bombing the oil fields. Saddam
Who
Hussein,
was?
in his retreat, was lighting them off. Was
Okay,
lighting fires on every oil well in Kuwait, trying to burn them, and by so doing, put up this huge smoke cloud, and maybe destroyed the oil field so that the Kuwaitis couldn't make any money out of it. I was not working for the government at that point, but I've been doing some work using commercial observation satellites to study military targets on Earth. The Kuwait Petroleum Company heard about that, and they called me and asked if I would come to London, and they would supply me with the overhead pictures from a French satellite called Spot, and asked if I could find a way to map which wells were burning and which weren't. So I went over there, and with a colleague, we spent a week and we produced the official map that Kuwait Petroleum used to identify which wells were burning and which wells weren't. And we found a way using the infrared camera on the satellite to see the most dangerous part of it. When they cracked open the wellheads, the oil gushed out, and instead of just all burning, it formed lakes.
Mhm.
Now, with the hot sun on it, the lakes formed a skin on top, like chocolate pudding in the fridge. But since there was wind blowing sand, the sand landed on top of the pudding skin. So that skin looked to the naked eye just like desert sand. And since the maps didn't show it as oil lakes, it showed it as desert sand before the war, because that's what it was desert sand. They had lost a number of geologists and oil field vehicles that had veered off the road, gone into the oil lake. The heat from the cat converter on the Jeep to the trucks ignited the oil, and the people died in a fireball. So they were very interested if we could find a way to identify the oil lakes, which I didn't think we could, because after all, sand is sand, whether it's sitting on oil or not. But it turned out that there was enough visibility in infrared, enough temperature difference because of that oil underneath, that we could draw accurate maps of where the oil lakes were. And when they were circulated from then on, the people knew where not to go off road. We thought this was going to be a very, very long problem to put out all those wells, all those fires, because after all, it was in the middle of the desert, and where are you going to get the water to do it? But Kuwait Petroleum Company had some really smart people. They noticed that the oil pipelines went from the collector pipelines at the wells down to the oil terminals in the Gulf, where there was water. And so what they did was drain the oil out of the pipelines, dip the end into the Persian Gulf, and pump backwards. And so they pumped the water from the Gulf to the burning oil wells. And of course, the way it was designed, the water went straight to where it was necessary. So they just got the Red Adair and the other oil well firefighters, and they went in there and in a matter of a couple of weeks put out hundreds of oil well fires, or maybe it was a couple of months, but on a time scale so much shorter than what they ever expected. They just realized they had a soda straw that dipped right into the source of what they needed, into the water. Okay, afterwards they had to clean all the salt water out of the pipelines, but that wasn't as bad a problem as you might think, because when oil is pumped from the sands of Kuwait, it has a lot of brine in it already. So it's salted oil already when it goes into the pipelines. So it was only a matter of just moderate additional hygiene.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, we were stunned when we heard about it. It cost us a few weeks of additional consulting because we didn't have to make him another map, but oh, all right. Yes,
Yeah, Peter, thank you for the great talk. When you talk about your conversations in China, you describe an international collegiality that
yes.
I've experienced in my work. Does that still exist in the world? Is there a level of scientist or diplomat that really is above the fray and really has genuine collegiality at that level? Do you believe that's still part of the makeup of the dynamics of
The
nations
last
now?
time I was in China was about 2010 or 2011. I can't speak to what it's like today, but certainly as of then, the same kind of camaraderie that existed amongst the weapons scientists from the Soviet Union and the US and China existed all the way through to that era. I sponsored, when I was teaching in London, I sponsored three-way conferences on nuclear crisis stability, the US, the UK, and China. And we met once in Beijing and twice in London. And the frankness was really stunning. And the last time I had contact with Chinese people in the defense business was in November, I think, of 2018 or 2019, when I was on a business trip to South Korea to give some talks. And it was a big international meeting that the South Koreans had sponsored. And a number of the Chinese that I knew very well were at that meeting. And we were as collegial over drinks and dinner and serious talking as we had ever been. So that's 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And I would be really surprised if much has happened. To the extent that it has changed, it's because of the Trump administration putting a great deal of stress on the Chinese and on Americans who are going to have what is called track two conversations with the Chinese. Track two simply means it's not really government, and we'll deny that we ever approved of it, but go ahead and talk and let us know what you said.
Interesting.
And we've had plenty of that went on, at least as recently as 2018.
That's very encouraging. Thank you for telling us that. I appreciate it.
Alan?
Pete, that was great. I mean, it really opens us up to a world that we know nothing whatsoever about. My question is, several years ago, there was a lot of talk of loose nukes, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, of the stockpiles of weapons that could be brokered, sold to possibly terrorist organizations or rogue states. Is that still an issue? Where is that at these days?
It will never cease to be an issue as long as nuclear weapons are small enough to pick up with one hand and carry away, and they are. Some of them are. But the actual loose nuke problem, as we conceived of it in the first 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's under control. Belarus and Ukraine gave up, which were really scary because they had a lot of the Soviet really high yield city busters. They returned those weapons to the Russians. Um, the Russians took our Nunn-Lugar money that Dick Lugar and Sam Nunn got approved, and they built safeguards within their own communities and gave their scientists something to do. Yeah, the loose nuke that we're apt to have, not nuke, but similar problem is with Trump in 45 days or whatever it is, because his head is all stuffed with those secrets. Well, maybe he didn't learn, but it could be.
You think he might sell them?
Is there anything he hasn't sold?
What a grifter.
Yes.
Alexander?
I was wondering, are you able to talk about your understanding of what's going on in Iran in terms of their development of nuclear power, and whether it's possible to distinguish what their purpose is for them? Because obviously there have been a number of the scientists who've been assassinated. You know, and it's obviously kind of there's a scientific interest and obviously a political one vis-a-vis Israel. Are you able to talk about how you understand that situation?
I've never had anything professional to do with the Iran nuclear situation. Just as every business, you know, things are fragmented, and that was not a line of responsibility I ever held. From what I understand from reading, and some of it's reading from the Black World before I gave up my clearances, and some of it's reading in the New York Times or the Washington Post, I am absolutely convinced that Iran is wanting a nuclear weapon and has taken many concrete steps to acquire them. We are and should be worried that they will complete that project.
Especially now.
I mean, I can't say any more because I don't know anymore, really. And if I did know any more that was current, then I really couldn't say anything. You know, that old joke about I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. There's a certain amount of grim truth to that, you really do have to worry when you're talking that you might say something that puts someone at risk.
Pete,
Yeah.
we started talking about this the other day, and my question of you, the advisory committee for was it the Pentagon with Corey Lewandowski?
Oh yeah, the Defense Business Board.
What is that board, and can those two do any harm, or are there enough people on it not to listen?
Well, let me put it this way. That board is so obscure that until Trump started to purge people from it, I didn't know it existed. The Department of Defense has a number of advisory boards. There's the Defense Policy Board, the Defense Business Board, the Defense Science Advisory Board. These boards are often, membership is often just given out because they're doing a favor for somebody. And I'm sure that's what it is for Lewandowski and Bossie. The Defense Policy Board has probably no significant influence. All of those boards, like the Defense Policy Board, only have the influence so much, only have as much influence as the Secretary of Defense wants them to have.
That's what I was hoping.
I can't imagine that Christopher Miller, the acting Secretary of Defense, has got time to worry about any of those boards in his remaining 45 days or whatever it is on the job. And I can't imagine that they have anything to bring up that would be really, really important for the rest of us. Now, the business board might, on the margins, influence contracting, and in particular contracting procedures. But my goodness, you know, they always talk about turning, you can't turn a battleship on a dime. You can't turn the Pentagon in a year. The Pentagon has so much inertia that to make any changes, if you're not at war with a really effective leader as the president, the building will do what it wants. And I don't think it wants these guys in charge.
Merle?
I have a question that's not strictly within your scientific area, but as a senior person in Washington, I'd be curious on your opinion. We've read that so many very experienced senior people in government have left in the last 4 years, leaving a certain amount of deficit for that kind of experience. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, during the Biden administration, do you think we'll be able to rehire a lot of those people? Or would they be interested?
They certainly will be able to rehire, but which ones they pick, I can't tell you. I can't guess. I don't know.
I wouldn't expect that. I just was wondering if we might be able to reconstitute the talent pool in some fashion.
Certainly, we will reconstitute much of it. And certainly, there will be a lot of familiar faces. There already are in the names that Joe has announced. There is no man that I can think of more qualified to be Secretary of State than Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken is flat out brilliant.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Tony Blinken is the son of an ambassador. He is the stepson of an ambassador. He went to school in France. He's got US and UK university degrees. He is absolutely fluent in French and I think in one other language, but I'm not sure. And to top it off, he's really nice. I like him a lot. I worked for him for 2 years. If he offered me a job, I would accept it instantaneously and probably not even ask what the salary is. He's that good. And anybody who wants to argue that Tony founded an influence peddling company called West Exec Advisors really needs his head examined. If you want people with experience, you want people with current experience. If they leave government, you'd like them to do something which makes use of that experience and lets them get more experience. Frankly, in the United States, I'm not saying business interests do or should dominate, but they have a big role to play. I don't want anybody coming into government who doesn't know, who is opposed to business. I don't want working for a business to be disqualifying if it wasn't, the mafia or something. I think the progressive argument against Blinken and others is just awful. Barr?
Penelope.
I'd like to add that furthermore, Mr. Blinken absolutely looks the part. This is a trivial thing perhaps, but I have never seen a more beautiful collar on his it's an unusual collar shape, the way his tie is. I mean, it's but, and again, forgive me for asking the question I did before that you wouldn't answer, which was fair enough. I have another one that you may or may not wish to answer. In the next, bless the internet, 44 days, 19 hours and 31 minutes and 34 seconds.
I can't wait.
Till the inauguration. That's, by the way, Sunnyvale time, not because that happens to be where it is, not Chicago time. What would worry you? What could, where are the vulnerable? It almost seems as though Trump is off on his own. I won the election. I like cucumbers. Aim, and that perhaps others are doing things like making sure that everyone who's lined up to be executed in the federal prison system gets executed, and that the oil and gas reserves in Alaska leases get made before the inauguration. What do you see that is a vulnerability between now and January 20th?
That is such a good question.
Well, it's low probability, but it's very high vulnerability, is the fact that the president has sole authority over the use of nuclear weapons. There is no legal circuit breaker if a president were to order the use of a nuclear weapon for any reason. The armed forces are expected to execute. I think that might not happen. I think that there are enough people in the chain of command who would say, screw you, and not execute the order, but I cannot be sure. There are other things he could do. He could withdraw from NATO. He could pull troops home from wherever they're located. He could do something disastrous to our deployments in Afghanistan. After all, we've lost a lot of lives and spent a lot of money, and we really are in a position where we might get a solution if we keep up the pressure in the next year that would make some of that expense pay off. But he might just want to poison the well and walk away and leave a mess behind. That's what I'm afraid of.
I think he does, yeah.
I get the feeling that
Scorched earth.
that there is some slow walking going on of things that are being ordered. That and as you say, people in the Pentagon may just say screw you. I seem to have read that during Nixon's last days, when he was drinking heavily, that there were some, you said there's no official way of keeping the president from issuing the nuclear orders if he chooses to do so, that there was something informally put in place. You're nodding, is that correct?
As far as I know from reading history, it is correct that the Secretary of Defense said, don't do anything unless you hear from me.
Yes. But that won't happen. Pompeo wouldn't fill that role.
Pompeo is Sec State, and he certainly wouldn't fulfill that role. And look at the churn we've had in defense. in order to get an absolutely pliable guy in the job. Trump is wily. I think he's tried hard to neutralize that kind of people so that they're not there if you should decide to give an order. But that's a worst case, horrible situation, and I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will come to that. I think the system has enough internal strength to withstand it. But none of us can be sure. Trump's actions in the last 2 weeks are so crazy, so lunatic, that if the Republican Party were not in thrall to that man, the 25th Amendment should have been used. He should have been suspended.
Pete, do you have any feeling that when this part of our history is over, that there will be an awakening where some number of Republican lawmakers wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't mean that. I mean, I can't see, I mean, Trump is an enormous, terrible person. He doesn't bother me not as much as his enablers, and I don't know what to do about the enablers.
Neither do I. My biggest hope is that those 2 seats in Georgia will go Democratic, but that's a long shot. I mean, yeah, okay, we carried the state, but more people voted for the Republicans for Senate than voted for any of the individual Dems. So I don't know what happens. I just wish I could turn a dial and we were 45 days further ahead.
Betty?
I was just going to say one thing that you can do is support organizations that are working grassroots to get the vote out in Georgia. And if anyone,
some names?
Yeah, one is called MVP, Mover Voter Project. You can find it online. It's superb organization for getting, they work directly, and they have created a Georgia fund so that is working directly. We don't need to give money to Stacey Abrams. She has all the money she needs right now. She has national support. So do the 2 individual candidates, Warnock and Ossoff. They both have good war chests. But what you need is to get the voters who haven't voted before out.
And the name again?
It's called MVP, Movement Voter Project.
Okay.
There's another one called Next Gen America, which I've been working for. I've sent thousands of texts already, both before the election and now to Georgia. And so I don't like doing the phone calling. I just find it very frustrating, and I don't think it's all that effective. But the texting is really very interesting. It's easy.
There was an article in the
best thing you can do is send money so these grassroots organizations can get to work.
There was an article
I think we should also know we should be able to indivisible.org, because they are very, very effective in locating resources for candidates wherever they are. And I myself have done hundreds of postcards. They do letters. They do individual contacts, meaningful contacts. Indivisible.org. It's very, very, very effective in flipping seats and supporting candidates where they need resources.
There is a problem that came up in a Washington Post op-ed about a week or 2 ago that I thought was very important to understand. We're not dealing with the same electorate that we were in, say, New York or Pennsylvania or anywhere else. We're dealing with a deep South, fairly provincial group of people. And the one thing they will resent is hearing Yankee accents on the phone. And they don't want Yankee folks coming and knocking on their doors. They need the money. They might want text messages, but it's got to look, what they do when they reach out to people has to look as if it came from Georgia.
We are sending cards to people, contacts in Georgia, so that everything mailed has got a Georgia postmark.
Well, that's important, I think. I think it's extremely important that that I don't get on the phone with my northern accent and try to tell a Georgian how to vote.
It's a very
I
good.
don't think it will work.
They still think they won the Civil War.
Right.
You mean the War of the Lost Cause?
Right. There's a
No,
big
no,
story.
the War of the Northern Aggression.
Did
Right.
you?
War of Northern Aggression. Hey,
There's a
look, I live in Virginia. I'm in the middle of all that.
Except they were the ones who shot the first shot, as you remember.
Yeah, well, we
Yes.
don't remember, but we've read about it.
I'm
Jack.
talking about you remember from reading. I don't know.
We all know from our childhood that the phrase "you started it" has no real meaning.
There was no way that war wasn't going to start, because there was nothing that the North could do that would make the South feel comfortable with their slavery. No matter what compromises were made, impossible. It was inevitable.
I would like to leave this just for a minute, because I'm curious. We read a lot, hear a lot about Europe and nuclear weapons in Russia and Middle East, Asia. We don't hear too much about it. I'm curious what you think, Pete, about China's role currently in the present and the near future, what their role may be, because I see them as being a primary threat, but I don't hear a lot about them.
The Defense Department, I participate in a couple of discussion groups. The Defense Department seems to be split in its view, whether they're a peer competitor or an enemy or an adversary, whether they're likely to want to live in physical peace, even if they want to compete with us for on economic bases. In terms of their technology, we used to think that Chinese technology was pretty poor, but I'll bet you every one of the cameras that was pointing at one of us is a Chinese device. They do beautiful work there now.
Well, their artificial intelligence is amazing.
And indeed, and it's worth once in a great while looking up who has the fastest supercomputer in the world. And while I don't know who's got it this month, there have been plenty of months of the years when it's been a Chinese machine. So they are capable of almost anything they want.
Joma?
That's what worries me. And we don't really, do we know their capacity? Do we have any idea where they are in terms of nuclear weapons, or their philosophy towards the use, like first strike or second strike? How do they feel about this?
They have stated, and I'll have to restrict what I say, they have stated publicly many times that they will not be the first to use nuclear weapons.
Okay.
I don't know whether I believe that. I believe that no first use of nuclear weapons is a promise that is not likely to be kept. If you're losing, you'll use them.
Joma?
I'm sorry I was late, but I'm very curious. I'm sorry that I missed your talk, but that shelf full of books, what are they, Dr. Zimmerman, behind you? Like especially the non-fiction ones. What are the things that you like to read? I've been trying to look at your shelf while you were speaking. What is
Could
it
I
you
ask you
read
to
for pleasure?
repeat that? I'm
What do
sorry,
you
I
read
didn't.
for pleasure? Your shelf is full of books. I'm curious what you read for pleasure. I genuinely mean this.
Junk.
Oh, perfect.
He does.
I read for pleasure. I read anything from political science and history and military science and arms control professional work down to, at the moment, I'm rereading an old Dan Silva spy story. And I still have some ancient science fiction from the 1950s on that shelf.
I guess I'm asking because you were talking about China and Jack Ma. He said the future is creativity. So from a science point of view, from the entire world of physics, what do you suggest one does in the education business to counter? Like, how does one become more creative? Do you propagate studying more liberal arts also?
I'm sorry, your audio is not very
Oh.
good. I'm having a hard time understanding you.
It's probably my accent. I was just saying because Joe,
There is some of that too, but
Joe,
it is the audio.
thank you. Mr. President-elect Biden said he's going to be heavily invested in education, and Mrs. Biden had worked with education. You know, Jack Ma had said the future is creativity driven. What are they going to do to promote that in the education system? Because isn't that
Hey, I know I've met Jill a couple of times. She's a wonderful woman. I don't know anything about the domestic program. All the stuff I have done for the campaign as a volunteer, and it's not influential stuff. I don't do much for policy. It's been foreign policy and defense policy. I don't know what they're going to do domestically. It doesn't mean I'm not interested, but it does mean that there are walls erected between the various compartments, and I'm inside a defense compartment.
very nice?
I mean, there's also, I had a friend who used to be on television all the time. For anything, he had a comment. The tendency or the temptation to become a universal expert is very high. I refuse to yield to it.
Bravo.
Penelope?
I'd just like to respond to that. First of all, this is family, Pete. You know, we are part of Barbara's family, and you are a blood part of Barbara's family, and that's sort of the way this conversation runs. But I think, and forgive me, Shoma, if I put words in your mouth, but I think part of what Shoma is asking, and that I'm interested in too, is clearly in citing Horatio Hornblower as a source for understanding quill pens, and reading science fiction and reading other things. You clearly are someone who doesn't just read things in nuclear physics.
No, I don't.
What do you, does that affect, do you perceive that affects how your creative brain works? And is that something that, you know, we shouldn't when we're talking about STEM, above all, there are those who say it should be STEAM, adding the arts.
The arts, right.
You know, and not doing away with the liberal arts, even as we try and encourage science and math and all that. How do you feel about that question?
I believe that whether you are a physicist or an English lit major, it's imperative that you cross it, particularly as a young person, that you cross those barriers and those borders and that you learn a lot about the areas you don't choose to specialize in. I don't read a lot of Shakespeare for recreation, sorry, but I have. I don't expect an English lit major to read Richard Feynman's papers that won him a Nobel, but he did some beautiful popularized science that's within anybody's reach. And I think that it's good for people who are in the social sciences, the humanities, to have read that, just as I think it's good for me to have read in those fields.
Thank you.
Betty?
I was just going to add on to that is that when I was a freshman as an undergrad, one of the things my mother had probably, maybe mistakenly, maybe not, she said, you must take some elementary education classes in case you ever have to support a husband. But anyway, the only thing my only takeaway from taking Ed Psych my freshman year was the most important thing that you can instill in a student at any point is the ability to ask questions and have curiosity. And I think that if we could just bring that into our educational system, we'd have a good foothold. The second thing is that I think it's part of everyone's obligation as a citizen to understand the culture that they live in, not just their job. And it makes for a richer thing, but that's just my opinion. Hopefully we can get it back. I've benefited from that kind of education.
When I was a freshman, we had a freshman convocation. I'm sure everybody went to a freshman convocation where the university president stood up and told you how wonderful you were as a class and how lucky you were to be at this institution and blah, blah, blah. But the Stanford president made an interesting comment that we're now 65 years later and it's still stuck with me. Education is what you have left when you forgot all the material in your courses. Training is what you forgot.
Ooh.
Excellent.
And that's a big difference. And I think that illuminates the situation. And I think it's important that people in the liberal arts study the sciences and people in the sciences study the liberal arts. I've made my career
I would like to add in terms of
synthesizing both.
I think the paradigm I would use would emphasize critical thinking and open-mindedness. And I think problem solution can come from either or all forms, field. It's a matter of getting involved and applying yourself honestly and using the resources that we're born with. And I think our education in terms of larger models, the problem we have for me, and this is directing myself to Penelope's concern, is administrations that come up with these wonderful theories and models that simply are never fully funded. Who was it? Bush said he wanted to be known as the education president, and they came up with No Child Left Behind, but very few people know that program was funded at 10%. So you have schools, local school districts that were actually competing for funds, federal funds, less funds than were there before Bush became president. It never really was fully funded. I think one of the things I have to say about Biden that I'm very hopeful for, David Brooks on PBS said so far his appointments, Biden's appointments are absolutely A+. Going to what Zimmerman said about Blinken, he said there's absolutely not a finer person to have in that position. And I think he's going to follow through with the the people in education. And I think maybe we're going to see the funds, the resources we need to see in education begin to flow to it. I'm hopeful anyway.
Pete,
Yeah,
Pete,
yeah, Barbie.
how can Congress object and throw up roadblocks to Biden's choices for cabinet and other appointments?
Mitch can refuse, if we lose in Georgia, Mitch can refuse to put them on the calendar and refuse to bring them up for a vote.
For approval, yeah.
Actually, I would be surprised. Yeah, that's how he could do it, but I doubt if that's going to happen. But there was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about this, and written by one of the Republican senators, on how the Democratic minority, through everything but the kitchen sink, at many of the appointments that our current president tried to get through, that required Senate confirmation. Ultimately, they all failed because the Republicans hold the Senate, and they remember this, and they may be less than generous when it comes to individual. I'd be very surprised if this gentleman doesn't get confirmed as the Secretary of State, but there are a lot of others that they may very well cause trouble, and it's sort of what goes around comes around. I always thought, as Betty pointed out earlier, that you don't try to model behavior that you found objectionable. Meaning this issue of who shot the first, the first cannon. Was it right for the Democrats to do this in all these instances? I don't know, because I wasn't following the individual candidates, especially for the undersecretary positions, or a lot of positions that don't get a lot of bling. But you don't use that as a model of how you can conduct yourself in the future. At least adult, serious professional people don't. Now, whether or not that'll extend to the current Senate or the new Senate that takes its position later early in next year, I don't know. But I've always asked that question. Did you think it was right to do this before? Then why are you suggesting it's right to do it now? But they say that Trump has changed the field, but I think this started earlier.
Let me point out an important difference between Biden and any of his recent predecessors. Biden is an alumnus of the Senate. He knows the Senate. He has friends there on both sides of the aisle. He has admirers on both sides. He has influence throughout the Senate. It's not like a rump businessman came in and started making ideological, incompetent appointments. It's not like a governor of a small state started handing out appointments to people who might or might not have trouble in the Senate. And it's not even as if you had a guy who'd been in the Senate for a little more than 2 years and didn't know anything really deep about the way it functions, who came in and started making appointments. You have, in the case of Biden, somebody who spent 36 years of his life in the Senate and who knows every in and out and knows, in the vulgar, where the bodies are buried. And I think that you'll see that gives him an advantage over Trump or Obama or George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush.
At the same time, though, and the degree to which things have changed, only 26 of those senators have acknowledged that he's won the election.
No, that's only 26 have acknowledged publicly. Right now, Trump is still in power. He will wield enormous power. Even when he leaves, he's got his MAGA army, and his tweets will have serious power.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the same as it will be on the afternoon of January 20th, when the presidential power has passed to Biden.
Exactly.
Right now, all Biden can do is cajole a bit.
The reason,
Betty?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, to follow up on what Pete just said, is that ultimately Trump will leave the White House and he will be kind of irrelevant
We can
No,
hope.
to anyone but his base. He won't have the same kind of power, the power that Pete was describing. And that's my greatest prayer, actually, is that.
But his base is 70 million voters. And in fact, I don't think all 70 million will stick with him.
Exactly.
You want to make a guess of what percentage of them will stick with him?
Half.
Good question.
Half is a great question. Half is always a good answer.
reason
What was the answer, Pete?
Half.
Split the difference. I mean, if you have no data to go on, what else can you do?
I received CNN ping. Rudy Giuliani has tested positive for COVID.
There
I
is a
got
God.
that too. Ain't it wonderful?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg has God's ear.
Yeah, but I mean, we are a group of nice, feeling, intelligent people. And I know I'm using up hard-earned good karma points by going, I hope it's severe.
Let him die.
Oh, they'll make a martyr out of him.
He's not worth it.
I must admit that when I heard that Trump was in an ICU, that I was hoping that
he wouldn't come out.
Right.
Yes.
But that we would.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Giuliani's a bit player. Oof. No, he's a loudmouth player, but he's a bit player.
Exactly.
And he won't,
Barbara, I don't think he's worth your karma.
no, he won't.
I mean it, actually.
He
Well,
won't have any staying power, I'm sure. Since we're talking
I'm
about,
with Penelope on that one.
since we're talking about political mortality.
I detest Giuliani, but he doesn't have any great importance.
No, Peter, there's a rumor that I can't in any way claim to substantiate, but I'm wondering as a Washingtonian, if you know anything about it, and that is that Mitch McConnell is suffering from a very serious illness. Have you heard that?
Because of his dark.
No, I have not. And I have to tell you that thanks to COVID, a lot of the networks that one might check into for things like that are gone. They're severed. I don't even know whom I would ask.
Wow.
What would be the evidence of it, Merle?
I don't have any evidence. It's
No,
just,
not evidence. I mean, but do people say they think he has this illness because he's exhibiting?
no, it's not. The people I've heard talk about it, it's not as if they have evidence, it's as if they're reporting something they've heard from seemingly authoritative sources.
Oh,
No,
I think it's wishful thinking.
exactly.
Right.
Oh, they had published photographs of him with obviously purple hands. Have you seen those? They were on
Yes.
They were clearly, and that's clearly from some anticoagulant that he was taking, whether it was aspirin or warfarin or whatever else, or some form of, molecular heparin or one of those things that caused bleeding underneath his skin. then the
Yeah,
question comes.
the bruising and bandages.
And what happened, like many elderly people, us included, the epidermis was thin, and when that blood got underneath there, he had splits and he had to have bandages because there's blood oozing out. That clearly means he's on some type of anticoagulant. We don't know what it's for. It may be secondary or primary heart attack prevention. But that's what I think started the rumor. And instead of coming out and saying, look, the speaker, I mean, not the speaker, not Nancy Pelosi, but I mean, he is on a small dose of aspirin, which is prescribed by his doctor as a preventative for arteriosclerosis. And he has a side effect from it, like millions of other Americans. But of course, nobody will come out and say that, and that may not be the reason. But that's, I think, what started the rumors, and it's perfectly understandable.
And not severe enough, unfortunately.
And what, Patty?
And not severe enough, unfortunately.
Well,
I'm using my
it could
karma
be,
points
but
too, Barbara.
as I said, I do not know, other than purple hands, what he's suffering from. And I'm not an MD, so I can't go tell you what that's a symptom of. I thought of warfarin or something, but I guess I would blame his doctor for not controlling the dose well enough.
That's not the case, because actually the spots happen, that they kind of let you know that the medicine's working.
Ah,
because my husband's on blood thinners, so he gets the spots every now and then.
I mean, I'm on a baby aspirin every day too, but my hands I don't get purple hands, and I don't know why McConnell couldn't just admit it.
What, say the truth?
Yeah. Honestly,
I'm sorry.
not in his
Critical
job
to his being.
Yeah.
Pete, thank you so much. I have to sign off now, but I just wanted to say thank you
Okay,
personally.
my pleasure.
Great hearing your tales from the front.
In.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara, for organizing
Thank
a great
you.
day.
Ciao,
Bye,
Betty.
everybody.
Bye,
So
everyone.
many of my resources are here in the group today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That was fascinating.
Pete, love
So-
you.
Great fun.
Are we all signing off?
Yep,
I have one last
Unless you want to keep talking, I'll listen forever.
so will I.
I would listen. I would talk for about another 5 minutes before I get absolutely fatigued from it. But that's about it. I would be happy to take a couple more questions.
I have one question. The reason
Shama,
I asked,
loudly.
the reason I had asked about the education is because I read, is it William McRaven? He said the two biggest threats to national security was education and climate change. And education because of the way the people vote. That's one of the reasons I'd asked about the education system, because he wrote a book, he did a presentation after he wrote that book, Make Your Bed. And he's spending a lot of time on this issue of education, that one of the biggest issues of national security. The examples he gave were the voting people who vote people like QAnon into power, that education is an issue that he's spending time on as a security issue. So I just wanted to know what you thought of that. That's why I'd asked about the education. Like, I don't know how it doesn't overlap. That's all I meant.
McRaven is a great man. I hope the administration finds a suitable place for him where he can use his talents. He's done a great deal for this country as a SEAL and as an admiral and as a code breaker, and I'd like to see him continue. And yeah, I think he's right that education is fundamental to us. We have to have a good public education system, even if many of us choose to send our kids to private schools. the public system is the foundation.
No, I'm not going to say anything.
I mean, Pete, Shari and I went through the Evanston public school system, and it was fantastic. And it included things like theater and the liberal arts. And we got as good an education as you could have gotten in a private school. Our teachers were involved with us. If you felt like it, you could go in and they would sit around and just talk history with you if that was your interest. That doesn't exist anymore. It seems to be training for test taking.
The other side of that is that aside from the nature of the community that the school is located in, you have the opportunity to meet people who might not be in your social set. And we no longer have a draft. You know, a draft was one way that people were able, at least men, were able to communicate across class. We don't have a race, class, religion, all those things. We no longer have that. I don't know if there's any hope for a national service option, which would provide that way of meeting others. But, you know, the public schools offer some opportunity for that. One of the things, you know, you were mentioning McCraven, Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, has talked about the importance of primary school education, that we in early, you know, elementary school, you know, sort of outside his purview in some ways, but, you know, there are people out there who are not in the education department who see education as vital to our national interests.
Oh, sure. I don't think you have to be an educator to understand that education is critical. And that if we don't teach little kids how to read, write, and figure, they won't know how when they get to high school or college or the employment or the workplace. So,
as well as the love of learning.
what?
As well as the love of learning.
Curiosity.
Well, yeah, that's nice to have too.
I think if you've ever heard Jill Biden talk about developmental, yeah, she's absolutely wonderful. She's, I have great hopes that the education policy coming out of this administration is going to be enlightened, wise, and well-funded.
I think it will be, yeah.
I hope.
It's a pity the president cannot appoint his wife to be Secretary of Education, but there are laws against it.
Nobody can listen. There's pillow talk.
Pillow talk is probably more influential than almost anything else. And my respect for Joe Biden knows no bounds. I think she is terrific. I think she will go down as the best first lady since Jackie Kennedy, and in many ways a better first lady.
Yeah.
I agree from what I've seen.
And she's going to continue working. She's going to continue teaching.
She wants to teach. Amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
The one time that I was at the Biden's home for a committee staff Christmas party, she had just finished her PhD.
Oh.
Just finished. And Joe stood up. He was so proud. He was so happy to say, now I want to introduce you to Dr. Joe Biden.
That's great.
That, by the way, is something that is really different than in the Trump administration. It's more like going back to the Obama administration. The love and respect between those two people is really deep and serious. And it's not like Melania and Donnie. It's real.
You know,
And there's,
I think Joe Biden is the perfect man of the hour.
Yes,
I agree.
absolutely.
a friend of mine said, we have a listserv that's been going on for 10 or 15 years that started out, it's expanded and has a lot of people from Hyde Park in it because that's where the organizer lives. But it started out with kids from our high school class
Oh,
going back to 1959. And Jay said he was absolutely never as enthused with Biden as I am, and that he wasn't really in favor of Biden, but voted because he wasn't Trump. He said, now as I see the administration being set up, Biden's the right man.
Mhm.
Always, all along, he's been the perfect person to serve now. Not 4 years ago, not 8 years ago,
Right.
but now.
Mhm.
He is just the right mensch to take us out of the ditch we've been in.
And what's a pleasure is being able to look at photographs of him and videos of him. The aesthetics are right.
Pete, where did you go to high school?
Albuquerque.
Albuquerque?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. How did you get there? I mean, you were, no, seriously, I'm, you know, my others will not be
Nuclear,
surprised to hear that I'm looking at my iPad, and Wikipedia says you were born in Virginia. How did you get from Virginia to Albuquerque?
nuclear weapons run in my family.
Close to Los Alamos.
Yeah, well, I know that.
Ah.
No, there are other facilities in Albuquerque that you probably don't know about.
Well, what?
There are facilities in Albuquerque that you may very well not know about.
Now we really picked up
We
on
used
that
to
one.
build them in Albuquerque and store them in Albuquerque. Los Alamos did the research, but they didn't do the construction.
But this
Wow.
was when you were a child, when you were in high school.
Yeah.
His dad was important.
My dad ran a storage site where
I
we
love it.
kept our nuclear weapons ready for use.
Oh, wow.
I once, after I was a professional and had all the clearances in the world, was able to persuade somebody to show me where he worked. I understood some of the tensions in the world and in my family then. There was a long corridor going into the mountain. And to the left, at the end of it, was a storage room for the plutonium parts of the bomb. And on the right was a storage room for the bomb cases and the high explosives that push them together.
Oh.
There were two guard rooms. There was an Air Force guard room in front of the bomb cases and an Atomic Energy Commission guard force in front of the plutonium. And these two groups of American soldiers had orders to shoot to kill if the other side went, if the other group went without authorization for what it had. Buried in that mountain was an office that is certainly not very impressive. It had a desk and file cabinet and safe and a wooden door with, you know, the ripple glass that you think of sometimes. And like in a lawyer's office, it said in gold leaf letters, President of the United States. Across the hall was a little auditorium that might have held 150 people. And the sign on that door was House and Senate of the United States.
Ooh.
This was under Truman and early Eisenhower, the evacuation site where they were going to go to fight the nuclear war. It was all the way down to Albuquerque because you could get there by air before the Russian bombers got to Washington.
Scary.
Thank
Hmm.
you.
It
That's
was
fast.
a very frightening experience to see not the president's office. That's always a 1 or 2 man operation. This tiny little room for the Congress. That's all they expected to survive.
Designated survivor.
Wow.
Yep.
That's scary. The
I
reality.
didn't bother to go. I didn't get a chance to see the quarters where they would be living, but I was told, it was bunk beds and pretty Spartan.
So this was after the war. This was not during the project to develop the bomb. Did you by any chance see
This was built after
John
1945.
Adams, Dr. Atomic?
What? This facility was built after 45.
Yeah, the bomb. I wonder if he need.
I was just saying this is after, this is developed
Yeah.
after the bomb.
Yeah,
at
sure.
Hiroshima, after the war,
Sure.
not during the testing at Los Alamos.
No, well, Los Alamos was doing stuff all the way to today. They're still there.
The lights are still on. I could see them from the house I house sat in Santa Fe for several years.
Yes.
This bright light out there. That was Los Alamos. Yeah.
That wasn't the aliens.
No, and when the Santa Fe Opera put on a John Adams opera, Dr. Atomic, you can see Los Alamos from your seat at the Santa Fe Opera, which I just thought I missed.
That's ironic.
That's ironic.
Yeah.
Maybe it's even sarcastic.
Pete, thank you.
Thank you.
This has
Love
been
you.
wonderful.
This is wonderful.
Do I have time for
for
one more?
sure.
It was my pleasure.
It's
Thank you, Barbie,
certainly
for having
something
me.
different from what we normally have.
And very exciting.
Do I have
It
time
was
for one more
fun.
question?
Yes,
I'm just wondering, we've had an occasion to meet some of the Conant family out east, and I'm just wondering, did you ever meet James Conant, or your father ever talk about him when you're in Los
That
Angeles?
was way above my father's pay grade.
Okay. All right.
Way above.
Well, we've heard so many interesting stories about the politics and how things happened, and I was just wondering if
My dad didn't come into the program until 1953 or 4, something like that.
so that's, yeah, okay. All right, just curious. Thank you, Pete. It was wonderful. Very,
You.
very,
Thank you, guys. It was
Ciao,
fun.
everybody.
thank you. Love you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Love you.
Ciao.